Blog Talk Radio, the world's largest online radio network.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is Thursday night. You are listening to the Audible Live. Of course, the Audible is the footballguys.com podcast. Cecil Lammey, Sigmund Bloom, Matt Waldman talking shut your mouth and a little bit of football, or a lot of football, because we are 1 week away. Gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, 1 week away from the beginning of, Broncos training camp. So a week from today, I'll probably be sunburnt, Sigmund, and I'll probably still have a man crush on Ronnie Hillman. Bloom, go.
Yeah, and you'll be telling us about almost getting hit by errant Peyton Manning passes. And see, so I think that you should try, not errant, maybe your location would be errant. I think you should try to get hit by a pass to assess his arm strength.
There we go. Sigmund Bloom, Cecil Lammey, Matt Waldman back from vacation. Matt, I hope you're well rested, brother.
Yeah, I had a good time and spent my night having a little bit of beer and practicing my Gene Bramall imitation to see if we can get him to crack up on the air for once.
Yes, there we go. So the boys are back in town. I think Gene is still in Ireland. We'll be checking on that.
Of course he is.
Yeah. So checking out Ireland until the beginning of training camp. The beginning of the football season is upon us, and this is the dangerous time. Bloom, nobody else was arrested from the weekend, correct? I mean, after Robert Quinn and everything that's gone on with everybody else, we're arrest-free today. You know, like at the workplaces where they have, so many days until an accident. Do we have can it go down to 1 day since we had an arrest in the NFL?
No, I know that's a good joke, and that would be a sign you'd have to update often. You have Robert Quinn, the St. Louis defensive end, another one. He had been arrested a week ago, or I don't know if it was June or July, but he got a DWI. So we say it every year around this time, but this is a nervous time for NFL teams. They just want it to be over. I can imagine coaches sitting there with the marker and putting the X's on the days with the first day training camp circled, because it's like a rope bridge. Some of these guys, I mean, granted, it's a small minority of NFL players that create this perception, but that perception is realistic in the sense that, I mean, it just shouldn't be this common. So I think there are a lot of coaches that will be sighing big sighs of relief whenever training camp opens, assuming, like you said, that we can get that sign up to at least 4 or 5 by the time training camp opens.
Yeah, dare I say 7? Can we go a week without some sort of arrest? And here's the thing, as far as DUIs are concerned, the NFL actually has a smaller percentage of NFL players get popped for DUIs than do those in society. But here's the thing, most every team, and I won't be as bold to say that every team, but most every team has a program in place that if you get a little tore up, if you get a little twisted, you get a little blotto, whatever, you have a number you can call and they will come get you. And for all the idiotic people who are like, what do I do with my car? Like, tow it. You're an NFL player. Like, who cares? Let your car sit overnight. Somebody breaks into it, then, hey, guess what? Maybe you don't get your ass drunk at a club anymore. Wildman, I got to throw this one to you. Marshawn, this is my son, of course, a favorite on this show, had his arrest. Were you more surprised by that, Matt, or surprised at the fact that he was driving a van? Now, I'm a Ford guy, and at least it was a Ford Econoline van. But seriously, Matt, I mean, is he the guy from Fanboys? Does he have a mural painted on the side of this van? Is there a fake R2-D2 on the top? Does he listen to Nonstop Rush in this van? Like, seriously, when has a van been cool since, I don't know, 1978?
I don't know, Cecil, but I'm sure there's some sites that you could reference some starlets who might be in that van. But I would say probably when you look at Marshawn Lynch's issue, I mean, no one's been a bigger advocate of Marshawn Lynch than I have this offseason. And, if you would like to see a pretty picture of Marshawn Lynch that's a definition of the term bloomed, you can go to the RSP site and see a visual definition of what that means. But it still looks like, with the reports of what's going on, I'm sure we'll get into more of this, but I mean, early indications to me are we may be overreacting a bit in terms of the potential for suspension just yet. And I just want to see how it plays out a little bit more for fantasy owners. Certainly, it makes sense to be cautious, but you can still end up getting him at a good value. Look at Vincent Jackson's situation a couple years ago. He ended up playing most of the year. And I think that you could find that Marshawn Lynch might end up being a value as a result of this, even though, for what he did, certainly, what it looks like right now in the court of public opinion, it doesn't look good.
Yeah, and we all have to preach caution when dealing with these situations, and we will jump into the Des Bryant situation, the Marshawn Lynch situation. We have a very urgent Twitter message to get to about these second-level running backs, including Lynch, DeMarco Murray, etc. Before we jump into the topics of conversation, and as always, we're going to jump to that shark pool, baby, the message boards of footballguys.com. Now, for the listener out there, I will be bowing out in the second hour. No, not to scrub the carpet, but because Batman Rises comes out tonight. And I have every Batman from 1977 till now. No, Matt, I am not getting dressed up to go see this movie.
Yes, you are.
I may or may not have a Batman T-shirt on right now. The point is this. Need to get a head start, maybe a long line out there. So I'll be bowing out in the second hour. Hey, we're going to have a full show for you next week. Of course, training camps kick off, all the news and notes you could possibly want. So let's jam-pack in a bunch of talk here in this first hour. And, gentlemen, you can get crazy and a little twisted in that second hour if you'd like. Before we do that, I just want to read this for you because you've got to know that the draft slots are coming. Sign up for the 2012 Fantasy Football Players Championship main event by this Monday, July 23rd. So remember, very important, check this out. Fantasy Football Players Championship main event. Sign up by this Monday, and you will receive your team's draft slot within over a month before the start of the season. Get that thing locked down. The FFPC main event is once again the premier contest in high-stakes fantasy football with over 700 teams registered already. The $200,000 grand prize and the $10,500 individual league prizes are the largest in the industry. And we all know that some high-stakes organizations have burned people out there. Scratch that. Not the FFPC. Of course, the entire prize pool put in an escrow account overseen by an attorney. This is the top of the line right here. Fantasy Football Players Championship. The FFPC league format and rules are identical to its popular sister contest, the Football Guys Players Championship. And for the fifth consecutive year, the FFPC is the only high-stakes contest to place the entire prize pool in an attorney escrow account for the duration of the season. This means you win, you get paid, and not get paid like 6 months later when you have forgotten that you won or what have you. You get paid within days of the end of the season. Lightning-fast payouts, and it's just fun, okay? You want to play in a high-stakes contest. This is the one you got to do. Strongly endorsed by footballguys.com. Of course, it's the Fantasy Football Players Championship. The FFPC continues to set the standard in lightning-fast payouts, and you will have your prize award within days of winning it. Visit the FFPC message boards and see the anticipation growing daily for the 2012 FFPC main event. Register today to get your draft slot. myffpc.com. That's myffpc.com. Fantasy Football Players Championship. All right, guys, we've got a lot to talk about, and specifically talking about Marshawn Lynch, and we're going to pass this thing around. Bloom, I'll start with you. Matt, I'd love your opinion on this as well, because we have this question coming in from Brian from Perfect Karma Productions at perfectkarma.com. What's up, Brian? He says, before the recent news of the arrest of Marshawn Lynch, I had him as a value pick, could outperform his ADP and play at top 10 at their position. He still has guys like Jeremy Maclin, Fred Jackson, Brandon Lloyd as potential value picks. What other picks do we think could fill this void? Also, could you speculate on what the time missed for these players could be and at what point they're still value picks? And with Marshawn Lynch specifically, Bloom, 2009 already violated the personal conduct policy in the National Football League. And again, getting ahead of ourselves to say any sort of suspension, but, kind of looking forward in the court process. Bloom, you're a lawyer. The court process can drag on, okay, and on. That's why in the Elvis Dumervil thing, it's like, he'll be suspended next year because they'll drag this thing out. That's what they do, okay? This is a case with, Des Bryant, with Marshawn Lynch, with Elvis Dumervil. They could just drag it on. Although Marshawn Lynch does have a court date, August 14th. And looking at a suspension that may be as many as 8 games, in my opinion. Right now, situation with Marshawn Lynch, your overall thoughts, we've had some questions on Twitter. Are the Seahawks going to go get a veteran? Do they all of a sudden become a player in the Sed Benson sweepstakes? By the way, Jets are interested there, not just the Raiders. So when we thought he could just go to Oakland now, it looks like the Jets may have some interest there. Surprise, surprise. What are you telling me? Sean Green's not impressive? I'm getting off track, Bloom, but my point is this. What the hell is Seattle going to do now?
I don't think Seattle's going to do anything at running back. I think that they are fine with their depth. They drafted Robert Turbin in the 4th round, somewhat similar back to Lynch. He doesn't run as hot or as much urgency as Lynch, but he's a similar back. They also have Leon Washington, who's their 3rd down back. Remember, Washington was quite a back before that leg injury, and we're getting pretty far removed from it now. And then Craig Lumpkin and Cease, our man, Terrell Sutton. And I think Terrell Sutton can do everything that Justin Forsett did in Seattle. So they have a decent set of running backs there. I don't expect them to take any action until maybe right before the season starts, and that's only if Lynch gets a 6 to 8 game suspension. Now, there's a lot to untangle here about the suspension. First of all, the arrest. There was a report that he almost hit 2 cars. He failed the field sobriety tests. He blew a .08, which is right at the level. But as he said, I'm an attorney. My wife actually was a DWI prosecutor. Well, she was a county attorney. She prosecuted DWIs, among other things. And I can tell you that with a field sobriety test failed and witnessed bad driving, he can get convicted on that. The BAC doesn't matter. His camp keeps coming out and saying very optimistic things about the charges getting dropped and optimistic things that they think that there isn't going to be a suspension. Now, this is going to fall under the CBA or possibly not under the CBA. There's a lot of variables here. If it falls under the substance abuse provisions, banned substances offense provisions in the CBA, first offense for Lynch, even though when he hit that pedestrian, was trying to avoid it becoming a banned substance. Alcohol wasn't proven to be involved. And again, you can see as soon as you start talking about this that it gets very tricky very quickly. First offense, banned substances, no suspension. Now, if it falls under the CBA because it is specifically addressed in the CBA, it's perhaps that could tie Roger Goodell's hands from making this a personal conduct violation, which Lynch has already been suspended 4 games, was reduced to 3 for any number of things he did as a member of the Bills. That was 3 years ago. Is that going to matter to Goodell? He had some incident where I think he took $20 or something at a restaurant in late 2009, but it's basically been 3 years. Does that carry any weight? There's also this aggravating circumstances issue. If that is the case, it shifts it from substances to personal conduct anyway. And as we've seen time and time again, Roger Goodell, judge, jury, executioner, dictator, emperor, all of these titles and more when it comes to NFL discipline. So it seems to me like no matter what anybody says, Roger Goodell can basically pronounce whatever he wants. He can find a way to fit it into whatever provision he wants it to fit under. And whether or not Lynch is convicted, whether or not the case is moving forward, may not matter. Remember, Brandon Marshall got suspended, and he never was even charged and convicted with anything, okay? Problems for Lynch. We're guessing here, okay? I just can't imagine that Goodell is going to let this slide. Now, I see, because Lynch has been keeping himself out of trouble for 3 years, that maybe this is a 1 or 2 game suspension. Some see it as that next step up in the personal conduct policy, which would be an 8 game suspension, maybe 6 game suspension reduction. This is very uncertain. I'll give you a data point from a Football Guys staff draft last night, a staff mock draft that we did. Lynch went, it's a non-PPR draft, 12 teams, Lynch went at 4-1. I think that was about right. When he went off the board, I was like, yeah, that feels about right. That takes the risk of him missing multiple games and balances it with the reward of getting a number 1 running back in the 4th round. I think the 4th round is about where he should go. Now, there's also talk that this could cause his guaranteed money to get voided. There's talk that maybe the Seahawks could suspend him. I know the CBA wouldn't allow that if he fell under the banned substances policy. Lots of ins, lots of outs, lots of stuff going on in the dude's head here. The point is we don't know anything. You have to go by gut instinct right now. If you really believe that Lynch is not going to get suspended, swoop in your dynasty leagues, put your offers out there. And really, I've put some offers out to try to get him cheap in dynasty leagues. His owners aren't bailing. Robert Turbin, if you're wondering about him, the most likely backup who would get the starts or at least the biggest amount of the work if Lynch misses games. He went in the 13th round of that draft last night. Just data points. We're going to keep gathering these data points until we have more specific information. So I've been going on for a while, but again, this is just to illustrate where we're at. We have a lot of little facts. We still don't know the most important one, which is what does Roger Goodell think?
Yeah, what's Roger Goodell thinking? And by the way, Matt Waldman, Bloom didn't mention the fact that now Marshawn Lynch's guaranteed money could be voided because of language in his all those tricky contracts, Waldman.
Certainly, and now that the prosecution rests, let's go ahead and do a little bit of some defense testimony here. Because certainly, and before we do that as an aside, I bet your T-shirt says, your Batman T-shirt says, "Ask me about my utility belt." But when we go to Lynch, looking at all of this, I mean, Bloom, you make some great points about his past issues, and looking at where there could be some gray area where Goodell could bring the hammer down, and certainly that risk is there. But I would also look at this aggravating circumstances as probably Goodell talking with the team, and I know that that's kind of like saying that's kind of biased information in a sense. But I would think getting they probably do put out feelers with the team, get an assessment of where this guy's at, what his conduct has been for, the past 3 years, the fact that he's taken more leadership in the locker room, that he has turned a lot of things around, at least from what we've seen on the surface. And if there's good reports out of there, maybe the aggravating circumstances is part of the issue there, that they feel confident that he won't get a suspension, or if he does, it will be a minor one of 1 to 2 games. Looking at the fact that, a lot of this is spin now by the attorneys and the media talking about the BAC level being at 0.8, but it was on the line, and they're arguing that maybe that the test was inaccurate and that there's some give or take play there. And when you look at all of that put together, if Lynch has been, a good citizen up till now, if the issue that he had before personal conduct involved a accusation that he stole $20 from a policeman's wife at a chain restaurant, and that was the extent of the personal conduct policy. It wasn't violence. Even the issue of hitting the pedestrian in the road, it wasn't one of necessarily violence or aggravated violence. So looking at all these things, there's certainly enough issues to say there that Lynch can be extraordinarily immature. Maybe he spends too much time hanging out with people that he shouldn't, and it makes him more of a target, because this is a guy that says what's on his mind and likes to have fun, and tends to be maybe a little naive about how the world works now as being a professional with lots of money, that you need to be a little bit more selective about your friends and where you go and where you are at what time of the day or night. And those things are all true, but I think that maybe this could be more of probably more of this is the last opportunity you're going to have if you clear this DUI case here. And certainly this isn't to say that DUI isn't serious, and certainly if he is convicted of it, and the evidence looks like that it's pointing in that direction, then he deserves the price that he needs to pay for it. But when you're looking purely from the standpoint of what could happen, I agree with Sigmund that the 4th round is probably a good time to get him right now. I only dropped him to 13th in my rankings overall among running backs because I'm not looking at where you should draft him, but where I think he's valued at this point in terms of, what he can do for the season. And I think his upside is still as high as a top 5 back in this league if he only misses, as little as a game, and if he misses a couple of games, then I still think he's a top 15 guy, meaning that you are getting good value for him in the 4th round. And I certainly wouldn't come off him this year in terms of, dynasty leagues. I would hang on to him because what you mentioned about Robert Turbin has the build, has the physical skill to be a starting running back in the NFL, but he doesn't have the conceptual knowledge. He runs a lot like Anthony Dixon did, a player that I actually liked, but looking back, he's someone that isn't decisive enough. He doesn't play with a good pad level, and he needs to learn how to be more mature between the tackles. And there are backs in that Seattle lineup or that depth chart who are more conceptually skilled than he is at this point. Now, if he can develop that quickly enough and become more mature, then yes, he's the most physically talented back that they have outside of Leon Washington. But I think that it's going to take him a little bit longer than just this year, and he's likely to be at best a 2-down back in this offense at best this year, and that doesn't really bode well for him to be anything more than, say, somewhere ranked in the 24 to 36 range, and making him more of a flex play.
Well, Marshawn Lynch, you got to learn when you get that fat NFL money, when your net worth has more zeros in it than a Star Trek convention, you got to watch out around you. You got to watch out for your surroundings. I don't even chuckle. Star Trek fans out there, I guess. And also on the Turbin tip, there's run to daylight. There's an old running back saying, run to daylight. And when you hear the great ones talk, they always talk about, not really seeing, just going to colors. Marshall Faulk would do that, where you just run to colors. There's running to daylight, and then there's what Robert Turbin needs, which is running to a neon sign that tells you, here's the daylight. And that's the biggest problem. Listen, Turbin has some build-up speed, and it's nice. I'm glad that one got you, Matt. He has some build-up speed, and I would call Turbin even deceptively fast. Not, he's not a blazer, okay? He's not an ankle breaker, but we know that for a big man, he can get up and scoot. But you mentioned that hesitancy, and I've talked about this with a guy like Brandon Jacobs. I call them rubber runners, where they're kind of like, are you sure the hole's there? Am I sure? And these bigger backs, Dixon was the same way. I'm glad you brought that up, Matt. Where you really got to convince them, like, hey, there's really a hole there. Like, if you just run hard, you can run through that shoulder. See that shoulder that you see? See that outstretched arm that you see? Like, you can run through that. So you almost have to coax them in to being this downhill, determined runner. We've seen backs learn that, okay? You can't necessarily learn vision, all right? That's one thing that is more instinctive than something that's learned. But we've seen backs before, several examples, mostly smaller backs, that learn to become better inside-out runners, okay? Not that rubber type of running back where you're just like, am I sure? Can I go here? Is that really a hole? I don't know if it's a hole, and I'm not calling them rubber running backs because of holes. I'm calling them rubber running backs because they almost have to rub in themselves into the play rather than just bam, explode, hit the hole, and go. That's the biggest problem with Turbin, and I agree wholeheartedly that we're looking at him as a 2-down player and someone coming in on 3rd downs to replace him. It is the Audible Live each and every Thursday night. blogtalkradio.com/audible. Make sure you check out our sponsor for tonight's show, the Fantasy Football Players Championship. Visit the FFPC message boards and see the anticipation growing daily for the 2012 FFPC main event. And make sure to sign up for the 2012 FFPC main event by this Monday, July 23rd. Go to myffpc.com. Now, going down the list, Rick Goslin, one of the best in the business. I wish he would have done a mock draft this year and told me the Broncos were trading out of the 1st round. But he had a very, very good article about Dez Bryant and Dez Bryant's situation, the domestic violence incident. If you're a sports radio junkie, you've heard the 911 call with his mom saying, she's going to put an end to this now. And we know the drama that has been surrounding Des Bryant and his mother, for years now. And all of this was well known, well documented before he was drafted. And now, some of this stuff kind of bubbling over to the surface. We look at the numbers for Des Bryant. There's playing up to your potential, and then there's this. I mean, Bryant, Bloom, and again, we're going to pass this thing around, so Matt, Bloom, get ready. Bloom, I'll start with you. This Des Bryant situation, when you look at the Cowboys, when Miles Austin was out, it was Laurent Robinson who really elevated his game. I hesitate to use stepped up, but, he elevated his game. He was the one that helped come through for the Cowboys. Des Bryant still failing to live up to that production, and the physical talent that he has, in my opinion, he's one of the most top 5, top 3 gifted, physically gifted wide receivers in this league. But he doesn't perform like the Andre Johnsons and the Calvin Johnsons. Not even close. We'd heard some good things about, hey, he's actually taking his conditioning seriously this offseason. Really? You're 3 years in, man. You're 3 years into being a pro, and now you decide, well, wait a second. I'm not very good. Maybe I should actually work and prepare and train. So we've heard some positive things. Obviously, this is a big negative. Bloom, we get into, any sort of personal conduct policy and all that, and slapping your mom with a baseball hat. What the hell is going on? I've asked this twice now, Bloom, but I'll throw this one to you. What the hell is going on in Dallas?
Yeah, and the picture is becoming clear with Des Bryant, and PFW put in one of their, this was in the Josh Gordon coverage, and I think I mentioned this last week, that they've already heard that the Cowboys are sure that they're not going to give Des a second contract. Things like this give you an idea of how they could be that sure. Now, Tim McMahon from ESPN Dallas said, well, hey, if Des has 2,500 yards and 20 touchdowns over the next 2 seasons, Jerry will change his mind. And that isn't necessarily confirming that they've already made up their mind, just that he's saying that it's not a open and closed case. I was talking online with Carlos Mendez from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, asking, you've been around Des, come on. He said he's very immature, okay? His marks of maturity, he makes Marshawn Lynch look like a World War II veteran. There's no comparison here with Des Bryant. With some of the things that he's had happen with his finances. Hitting your mama? Now, I know his mama's only, 14 years older than him, but, for her to have to call the police on him, it's his second incident this off-season, getting into trouble. When you just add up everything that's happened with Des, he seems like a prime candidate for Roger Goodell to put a shot across the bow and say, this will not stand. All these transgressions will not stand, and you have to be held accountable for them. And it's all about how you make the Shield look. And at this point, I think that we can go back to the draft, go back to Des Bryant, who, as Cecil said, top 5 talent wide receiver in the league, without a doubt. And you see him fall to the 20s. And why? This is why. He doesn't get it. Now, will he eventually get it? And that's the amazing thing, is if he does get it, he could be the number 1 wide receiver in football. It's just that simple. But there are some things. When Des says that he was playing hurt all of last year, on one hand you want to say, woo, what's going to happen when he's healthy? On the other hand, if he's not keeping himself in tip-top shape, is he ever going to have a season where he's not playing hurt all year? Or for that matter, is he a guy who maybe is a little brittle? And maybe not brittle in a sense that he's easily hurt, but just the way he plays, he's going to suffer a lot of injuries. So a lot of things to sort through with Des. I do think that this sent a ripple through the Des Bryant dynasty owners who are thinking, hey, we have a guy who's going to jump into the top 7, top 5 this year and stay there, kind of the way Calvin Johnson did a few years ago. I think that what we can see mostly from this is that Des really hasn't changed. Now, where's the break point for his value? I don't think he falls as precipitously as Lynch did. Des was going maybe in the early 3rd, late 2nd, as far down as the late 3rd, even early 4th. He may fall to the 4th or early 5th right now. I think that I'm not going to be the one to take him because of any number of things, but I still think you're going to have somebody in your draft that's very optimistic about him, and maybe he doesn't fall at all. And Mr. Walton.
Matt, your thoughts on Des Bryant here as we look at this situation with the Dallas Cowboys. It's just not good. And, Matt, does this also mean that Josh McDaniels was right because he selected Demaryius Thomas, and I myself railed against the pick. Like, why would you take Demaryius Thomas when Dez Bryant's right there staring you in the face? Well, now we know why.
Yeah, I think we see very clearly why this is the case, and that's why, private investigators are abound in the NFL when it comes to pre-draft analysis, and that's why they have these guys on staff. And we're not going to be privy to that type of information except when it's leaked out, and it looks ridiculous that, Jeff Ireland is asking questions about Dez Bryant's mother. Well, I mean, here we go. And you got to, you look at Dez Bryant, and what I think of right away is a player that I cut my teeth on these types of players and learned to avoid, which was Michael Westbrook, the talented wide receiver from Colorado with Washington, who Darryl Green said could have been one of the best receivers in the game if he just had a love for the game, a passion for it, and worked at it. And Westbrook continued to get hurt with silly injuries and not being able to stay healthy, punching Stephen Davis in the face, not really having a love for the game, and then having one terrific season and finishing it, still playing well with I believe it was a broken or sprained wrist, and then tearing an ACL the next season, and then never really, coming back from that and being the player that he could have been. And I think Dez Bryant, has that kind of talent. He has that kind of top-tier talent, as Bloom mentioned. But, I joke in my rankings, I call him the 30-minute man because right now that's about all he can play in terms of his past track record of conditioning. And when you add all these things together, any one of them is enough to look at him and say, well, he could grow up and mature and things could be okay. He's only in his early 20s. There are a lot of people in their early 20s who are quite confused about life and how to kind of act like a mature adult. It's just part of society. It's been that way for years. I don't agree to that whole look at that generation 3 generations before. They were cut a little bit more of a break in terms of the type of expectations that were had on them in some regards compared to what people have today. We could even look at DUI as an example. DUI was just being boys back, 50, 60, 70 years ago when people were driving drunk. And nowadays, we look at it and see it for what it is. So, looking at somebody like Bryant, he's still young, could still grow up, but the problem is there's such a multitude of issues with him that when they add up to the extent that they do, it's hard for me to get behind him and believe in him in the way that maybe I would look at Ryan Matthews and some of his issues early on in his career, or maybe even Marshawn Lynch with the way that things have been going for him. So, for me, I look at Bryant, and the burden of proof is going to have to be what can he do to turn things around this season before I would take a chance on him next in redraft leagues. And in dynasty leagues, to me, you're going to just have to hope that you get a really optimistic person who is going to offer more than you would expect. Otherwise, you might just have to hold on to him and hope for the best.
Yeah, I had a chance to hang out with Michael Westbrook last summer. He's a UFC fighter now. And the story I could share, I can't share it on the air, about when he body slammed and physically assaulted Stephen Davis. It was basically like a scene out of Reservoir Dogs when he was like, yeah, he kept yapping at me, so I body slammed him, watched him shut the F up. So, Michael Westbrook, back in the day. Now, we'll quickly go through this segment, and I'll throw this one to you, and then we'll move on. We know the Elvis Dumervil situation. The truth will come out. The Land Rover wasn't his. The gun in the glove box wasn't his. He never flashed a gun after someone cut him. Oh, my God, you got cut off on South Beach. That's a reason to show someone a pistol in your drawers. By the way, not the best place to put a pistol. I'm just saying. The Elvis Dumervil situation now, I've cautioned people here in Denver, this process will get drug on. It'll drag out longer than Porky Pig trying to sing Stairway to Heaven, Bloom. But you look at this situation with the Broncos, obviously Dumervil, very important to the squad in the pass rushing ability. So I'll toss out 3 names for you, and just give me your thoughts on Dumervil, and then the 3 names and the fit with the Denver Broncos. One is Andre Carter, who we pretty much assumed would just go back to New England when he was healthy. And it's not like Carter needs a ton of reps in training camp, Bloom, so he could sign in week 3 of the preseason and play in week 1. That's not a big deal. Another one is Aaron Campman. Are his knees just completely shot? I have a feeling the answer is yes. and then Matt Roth, the other one, and Campman and Roth both having experience with, drumroll please, Jack Del Rio. So just quickly thoughts on the Doomerville situation, Bloom.
Yeah, well, again, we got to sort this stuff out. Doomerville's not a problem child kind of character, so I don't expect him to have a long suspension. I think Jason Hunter is still an interesting guy there. I think Jason Hunter's shown a little pop occasionally. He could be somebody that could fill in a pinch. I'm not too worried about that. I think this is one that got overshadowed very quickly by Lynch and Bryant because they have a history. And just the fact that we're talking as much about them as we are, and that Doomerville's the footnote, that's the kind of stuff that Roger Goodell's talking about when it's about how it makes the Shield look. So Elvis Doomerville, good timing.
Yeah, good timing. And Adrian Peterson even like, whoo, dodged that one. And Peterson himself as well, not known as a troublemaker, not known as a knucklehead. We'll go ahead and move on to a situation that is getting more cloudy, more complicated. We saw the Monday deadline pass. We saw Ray Rice get a deal done. I talked to Adam Schefter on Monday, and he said at 2 o'clock Eastern time, the deadline was 4 p.m. At 2 o'clock Eastern time, a Ravens source told him there was a 20% chance a deal got done with Ray Rice. At 3 o'clock, Ray Rice was in the building. So Rice obviously saw what the Bears did for Forte. He looked at the situation saying, okay, the one-year tender compared to getting my money guaranteed up front for those first couple of years, it's not as much. In fact, Matt, I really think Ray Rice is underpaid. I mean, still, with this new long-term deal, Ray Rice is underpaid, and the Ravens kind of got one over on him, in my opinion. But Rice, being the soldier, being the team player, went ahead and got that deal done, and now the team can move their focus to Joe Flacco. Not to Ed Reed. Sorry, Ed. I'm glad you're enjoying mowing your lawn, but you're going to have to stay there if that's the way you act. And, of course, Ed Reed now saying, no, I'll show up to training camp. Yeah. Then why do you run your mouth on Twitter? Like, I'm sure I'm enjoying mowing my lawn. Hint, hint. You're not going to get paid. Okay, homeboy, you got 2 years left. My point is this. Forte, who essentially had no leverage, okay? So the fact that after 2 years of wanting a deal, they finally threw him a bone, Matt, I mean, that's one thing. I really look at this Rice situation and say, good job, you got your deal, you're still underpaid.
Yeah, and it is very true, but it's the nature of the running back position in the NFL, and it's just a reflection of that. The fact that teams look at a guy like Ray Rice, who is an all-purpose yardage machine, great between the tackles, plays banged up, is someone that carries the load, is probably almost equal parts emotional leadership of this team with Ray Lewis at this point. And they're more concerned about paying Joe Flacco, who isn't half the player that Ray Rice is at his position. That should tell you the value of the positions in the NFL and how that they look at that. Whether you agree with it or not, that's the reality. I would agree with you, Cecil, that he's got underpaid. Matt Forte got underpaid. But the realities are that they look at the numbers and they say, these guys probably, we project, have 1 to 2 years of starter ability left. And if they prove them wrong and become the Emmitt Smiths or Marcus Allens of the running back position of this era and play, another 6 to 8 years of high-end production, then they will reward them again, but probably still have leverage, and they know that this is how it works. And it's just the NFL gaming that system from a financial perspective. And, it's just a reality, and it's just kind of sad when you look at it from a fan's perspective. But these guys still, in the end, if they're getting guaranteed money, they're getting millions. They're getting to play a sport that they love. There is still, a little bit of a silver lining there, I would say.
Well, let's move on to the Maurice Jones-Drew situation. And going back and forth with one of my Jaguars guys, Bloom, via text, I got to ask me in mid-August when kind of pushing for a feeling on this MJD situation. And this is someone not in the media. This is someone that works in that building. This is real, and both sides. We've heard it from Maurice Jones-Drew camp. We've obviously heard it from the Jaguars camp. Gene Smith has dug his heels in. MJD has dug his heels in. First off, when's the last time a holdout worked for running back? And MJD,
Emmitt Smith.
Yeah,
Steven Jackson.
you look at this situation with MJD, it could get ugly. Now, from what I've gathered, Bloom, the regular season not in danger yet, but stay tuned. How ugly could this Maurice Jones-Drew situation get?
I don't think it'll get that ugly. I have a feeling that this could really end up being one of those things. Remember when we used to look at holdouts as veterans don't like training camp. They just would rather skip it if they could. Well, Maurice Jones-Drew can. Every indication, and I mean every indication, is that they're not going to give him any more money. He's going to get, I think, 9-point-something million, 4.9, 4.4 each the next 2 years. It's not great money, but he did get a big extension back in, 2008, 2009, and this is just what he has to live with. He's not going to get the extra money that he's seeing doled out to guys like Lynch, Forte, Rice. It's not going to happen. So this could be a chance to have a little bit of a vacation. I would still draft, and we get into running back scarcity here. And what do you do now if you're picking 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and you don't want to take a quarterback because you want to take advantage of value later? You don't want to take any wide receiver except maybe Calvin Johnson. If you don't want a tight end, who are you going to take, Chris Johnson or Maurice Jones-Drew? So I still think that Jones-Drew is a fine pick in that 7 to 10 range. He led the league in rushing last year with probably the worst quarterback play in the league in his offense. It can only improve this year with the improved receivers. They have a good defense in Jacksonville. I still think MJD is pretty safe. Now, again, with the check back in August thing, if we're still talking about this after the 3rd preseason game, he still hasn't shown up, then it's time to wonder about the shape he'll be in and some things like that we see with holdouts. But I still feel it is clear at this point he's not going to get any more money. The question is how he uses this situation to his advantage.
And Maurice Jones-Drew, in a recent interview on Denver sports station 102.3 ESPN, said that he's not going to go public with any sort of comments. Just know that behind the scenes, him and his agent and representatives are working to try to get him a new deal. And in the meantime, he's sitting. So fantasy owners are sitting, and they're nervous about this season. Leads us to Rashad Jennings. Bloom and I have gone over our Rashad Jennings take plenty on this show. Matt, I want to hear from you. Listeners out there wondering what Matt Waldman thinks of Rashad Jennings and any sort of opportunity that he might get, whether it's with the Jaguars this year or maybe with the second team.
He's a great choice late in the draft. He's somebody that I've been targeting because you just look at the size, speed, hands, skills that he has. He's a terrific receiver, one of the best ones on the team, and has been labeled that even when they thought they had good receivers on the team a few years ago. So when you look at Jennings, he is a lead back talent, maybe even a feature back talent, if the situation were right for him. But when you have a player the talent of Maurice Jones-Drew, certainly someone like I would even argue Trent Richardson could have been put in that situation and said that he had feature back talent, but unfortunately he's going to back up Maurice Jones-Drew. That's how talented the guy is. When you bump Fred Taylor out of a job or eat into his time, as talented as Fred Taylor was, that's a good frame of reference there. So with Rashad Jennings, he's someone that I certainly would let his status creep up a little bit on your draft board as you're looking at this situation. But I do agree with Bloom that when you take a look at at Maurice Jones-Drew's age at this point as a running back, some of the knee issues he's had, this could be a convenient, hey, the knees bug me a little bit when we have those practices in the summer here, and maybe it would just be good to rest him up a little bit more. I know the system. I'm ready to go. I know the drill. And that could be a little bit of a posturing type of thing going on. So, I just look at it as that if he does sit out camp, it still does heighten the risk a little bit that, he could incur an injury during the season, just not maybe being in as great a shape as he should be, and then that could open the door for somebody like Jennings.
chat room react to me as we get closer to the regular season and the chat room gets more full, including guys like Motorboater and SS Motorboat. It's spreading the nation. So thank everyone for jumping into the chat room. Geek Jock as well. I like that. And hey, there's Ali Fontana, 5-ish checking in. Gebs, what's up, dude? So all of our good friends here, all of you are our good friends for listening to this show. It is the Audible Live each and every Thursday night, blogtalkradio.com/theaudible. Want to make sure you check out our sponsor for tonight's show, the Fantasy Football Players Championship. Who wants tacos? Oh, wait, wrong sponsor. Fantasy Football Players Championship, the $200,000 grand prize and $10,000 500 individual league prizes are the largest in the industry. Experience the Las Vegas live draft, parties and special events at the Rio Hotel and Casino, or draft online with no additional fees. The FFPC league format and rules are identical to the popular sister contest, the Football Guys Players Championship. And for the fifth consecutive year, the FFPC is the only high-stakes contest to place the entire prize pool in an attorney escrow for the duration of the season. That's security, okay? You don't win $200,000 grand prize. You don't want someone saying, I will get it to you. Or you know that big check we gave you? You can't cash it. No, none of that. None of that. Security, peace of mind, and fun with the Fantasy Football Players Championship. Check out myffpc.com. Visit the message boards and see what all the high-stakes players are talking about. It's the Fantasy Football Players Championship. Make sure to register today to get your draft slot and register. Sign up for the FFPC main event by this Monday, July 23rd. We'll move on from that. Let's talk some second-tier running backs. Again, the second hour, we'll go to the shark pool, the message boards of footballguys.com. I will bow out to don my cape and cowl and hop in the Batmobile. I think my car might be faster than the Batmobile, but my point is this. Dark Knight Rises, I'll be there. I'll be square, and it's Geek City, but let's do it. Yeah.
I bet the Batmobile also parks away from everybody else. No cars right next to the Batmobile in the parking lot.
Why is this that big of a deal? People think that I'm a douchebag because I take up 2 spots when I park, okay? That's not a D-bag move. I park at the very last spot. I go to the very end. Now, all the fat asses in America, you think those fat asses want to walk all the way to the Walmart? No, I park at the very end. I take up 2 spots so nobody door dings my nice SHO, 429 horsepower, by the way, speed of light trapped under my hood. The point is this, and that's not a D-bag move. If I was parking, like, in the handicap spot and taking up 2 handicap spots and flipping the bird to the people that need the handicap spots, that would be one thing. Then door ding me all day. Then take a piece of chalk and draw an outline around my car. Whatever you want to do. Water balloon my car. I don't care. Key the damn thing. But I park at the very – nobody. This is like parking in the country and walking for a mile just to get to Target, okay? It's not a D-bag move. It isn't, and I'll keep telling myself that anyway. That's thank you, Bloom, for bringing that up.
Sure.
That's a rant.
Deal,
Yeah, I'll save that rant a little bit later, a little more in-depth on that. But let's talk about this Twitter question that we got from @GraceClaireDrew, and that's Seth. Seth, what's up, dude? And thank you very much for listening to the show. Can you guys discuss the second-tier running back cluster, MJD, who we've talked about, Chris Johnson, McFadden, Richardson, Forte, Murray, in depth for the Audible tonight? Thank you. With Forte, Bloom, and you had this note via Twitter about where to draft him and where to feel confident now that we know that there's no holdout situation with Matt Forte. We know that he's, not going to miss 3 weeks in the training camp and come in out of football shape. We know that he's going to show up. He's going to have a full training camp and should go back to being a top 10 fantasy running back, so draft him as such. Expand on that, if you will, please. And then Murray and Richardson. Matt, I'm going to save McFadden and Chris Johnson for you, but Forte, Murray, and Richardson, your thoughts on those 3, Bloom?
Yeah, in PPR versus non-PPR will make a difference here, although Forte might have fewer receptions because they're better wide receivers in Chicago. But I still think that what we've seen from Forte puts him at the top of this list. And no matter what teams think, Fred Jackson's situation is similar in the sense that no matter what teams think they're doing with that second running back, things they're doing with the offense, when you have these proven workhorses who can be the engine of the offense, it just kind of ends up being same as it ever was. So I have Forte as that early second-round running back, especially in PPR. He's fine. Then I would put Richardson next, just because he's going to get a ton of work. Cleveland is, they gave up a fourth, a fifth, and a seventh-round pick to move up one spot to get him. I mean, they're going to try to show why they did, and he's going to be talented. And they actually have a pretty solid offensive line there. I would say that Trent Richardson comes in second. Murray comes in third only because his injury history scares me. Now, all of these guys are very solid second-round picks, and I think if any of them are there at the end of the second round, you're happy to get them, and especially if you did not go running back in the first round. The problem with Murray is he's just had so many catastrophic injuries. The talent is there, the opportunity is there. There's no doubt about it. But looking back 2 years at Oklahoma, it just seems like, and this is one of those things where we could get into a bigger discussion about injury risk and are injuries random and what kinds of injuries, and where's Dr. G? We need him. He's tilting back some pints. Well, right now, actually, it's like the middle of the night, and so I hope he's not tilting back pints. He's there with his family. But if he is, I'd say that's pretty cool. Anyway, getting off topic here. The question is, what kind of players are injury prone that you should really worry about, like a job at best? What kind of players that you could look at their injury history, but say, Fred Taylor, we can talk about someone that for a while we just thought it was a given that he was going to get hurt, and then he actually was pretty durable for a while. So I think the verdict's still out which one of those two Murray is. I know he plays all out. I know he suffered a lot of very bad leg injuries. And, these are the kinds of things you have to find to distinguish between these players. They're all good second-round running backs. Likewise, when you're trying to distinguish between Foster, McCoy, and Rice, I'm looking at Ray Rice with 1,200-plus touches over the last 3 years and saying, well, he has been worked to death, where the other two guys haven't quite been worked that hard, not to mention Ray Rice was worked to death at Rutgers. So, but it makes it sound like this is a big deal you should be worried about. No, these are the kinds of things that you find. It's like putting on your little jeweler's eye. You're looking for flaws, any kind of flaws. And when I look at Murray's injury history, that becomes a flaw as far as I'm concerned.
McFadden and Chris Johnson. Now, the good thing about Chris Johnson is he stopped making horrible rap singles. And not that I'm not a fan of hip-hop, but just Chris Johnson, stop. Even Deion Sanders shaking his head saying, man, he shouldn't have done that. And he's working out at the team facility, Matt, and this is a very good sign. Usually in the offseason, he would work out in Orlando away from the team. Now he's looking to bounce back, and bounce back after a season. He finished as RB16. He was the 16th best running back in fantasy football last year. Well, now he can get back into that top 5. So your thoughts on McFadden, Chris Johnson, where to draft, how much caution, and any sort of situation you see arising for both of those talented backs? Matt Waldman, go.
When you take a look at McFadden and Johnson, the first thing is that McFadden's going to be playing, it sounds like, in a zone read offense, which I think is going to be interesting to see how he does, because when I look at the Arkansas offense, I didn't think he had great vision, and he was playing in more of what I thought was a power offense, especially with the Wildcat running behind, pulling guards and not doing a very good job of it. So I'm a little bit worried about McFadden in that extent. But more so just about the injury, because he's a reckless runner. And I think that's the type of thing that worries me more. So to me, he's the biggest risk, and he's someone that I have probably at the end of the first round, early second round, as a running back goes. And then looking at Richardson, I'm a little bit higher on him, mainly because when you look at what the Browns were able to do with Jerome Harrison, with Peyton Hillis after that, this is a team that can run the football, and I think that you look at Brandon Whedon, and I think that he is someone that's going to be able to stretch the field a little bit more. They're going to have some better weapons for him. It may not be all in sync, but I think that you look at what Richardson's talent level is able to do, you're going to see someone who is able to get more 4, 5, 6 yard gains, where McFadden might get 2 or 3 and then break an 80-yard run. To me, I think Richardson's going to be a little bit more consistent. And just to touch on it, it's funny how Bloom talks about the flaws, and you can turn some of those things inside out on some of these players. You look at a guy like Ray Rice, and there were plenty of players like Adrian Peterson who had tons of carries, Cedric Benson who had tons of carries, and they didn't get hurt. They played well. They continued to play well. Emmitt Smith was one of those guys. And then you could look at DeMarco Murray, and I wouldn't say his injuries were necessarily catastrophic. I would say that they were certainly season-ending. But then he came back and continued to play, and he played banged up in some regards, but still was able to function well and produce well in that Oklahoma offense. And you got to look at some of these other factors in play, and you look at him and think, where's the upside? And I think that those, and when you look at him compared to somebody like Maurice Jones-Drew, who may be winding down a little bit more with the known knee injuries, he's someone that I would probably raise a little bit higher. When you look at Chris Johnson, though, I mean, we're talking about him. Chris Johnson's going to be in an offense that's going to employ more run-and-shoot concepts, something that Chris Palmer has been long doing since he was at Jacksonville, then even with the Patriots, also with the Giants. That's his staple. And when you look at those types of concepts, he's going to be more involved in the passing offense. It makes me think that there's a possibility that Chris Johnson could have more of an Ahmad Bradshaw-like season, which would then drop his value to being maybe a low to mid running back too. That could scare some people. But you have to remember that I think the Titans are hoping to be a better passing offense, and there's promise for that in many respects, but you're looking at a young rookie wide receiver who is having to learn, who's going to play the X spot. Then you're going to have, still a young developing tight end in Jared Cook, who hasn't proven that he can be a starter in the league from a wire-to-wire basis, despite a lot of opportunities there to, flash some good-looking stuff. And then you have Kenny Britt, who's had 2 knee surgeries this offseason. And I think that means they're going to have to rely on the running game more than what they would like. I mean, it's just like the Falcons last year saying, we're going to be the greatest show on turf in the Southeast. And then they try that, and they realize they got to go back to the running game. So to me, Chris Johnson is a good bet to be a top 10 running back. I think he's got a pretty good chance to be a top 5 back this year, and I wouldn't count him out. I think last year was more of the holdout, not being in football shape, lots of distractions, and I think that when you have a guy that had the type of season he had a few years ago, you don't count him out and say, oh, it's a wrap. I think that you got to give somebody like him a second chance, and the Titans seem plenty confident in him to do so.
Bloom, Matt brought it up with the Kenny Britt having surgery on both knees. Give us your thoughts there.
Yeah, it dropped them down to the bottom of that wide receiver 2 tier, basically 6th round. It's just a lot for a player like Britt to overcome. He's not a player who's had great work ethic in the past. He's had the history of those hamstrings and things like that, where that's a problem. When you're having all this rehab now on both knees, you also see that, this early in his career, he's already having to have cleanup surgery. It's just a lot to ask of a player coming in, one reconstructed knee, the other knee got cleaned up. I like Kenny Britt's upside. Without a doubt, he could be a top 5 fantasy receiver. He was on that track last year. You got to love the offense. Again, Matt bringing up the Chris Palmer stuff. One of the things that the question we'll get a lot in the next couple of weeks is, what are you most looking forward to seeing in training camp? I want to see what Chris Palmer's pass offense looks like. He did not have a chance to install it last year. They have some great talents there. This reflects both on Matt Hasselbeck's stock, if he is the starter as fill in early on, or Jake Locker when he gets in there. Also affects the stock of guys like Nate Washington, Kendall Wright, the tight ends. By the way, another good report on Taylor Thompson. So I think at this point, Kenny Britt is somebody that you probably are letting someone else take, because I want to see him there. Wide receiver 25 or so as my wide receiver 3. I'll take Britt, but otherwise, that's just. That's facts. When you come in with 2 knees have been operated on, 1 total reconstructive, it's hard to expect him to be the guy he was in the past.
It's the Audible Live each and every Thursday night, blogtalkradio.com/the Audible. Sig and Matt taking over from here. Matt, I have one final question to toss it to you, and then we'll be checking in next Thursday with the gang gets back together, and we'll have some training camp football to discuss, and it will be awesome and amazing. But the Steelers making progress in talks with Mike Wallace. This is an issue that Sigmund and I have actually disagreed on, Sigmund leaning more towards downtown Antonio Brown. I look at the construct of a Haley offense, and I look at Mike Wallace, who, by the way, has skipped minicamps and OTAs, Matt, but still swung by and picked up his playbook. Yeah, no concern there.
Yep.
Okay, kid picked up his playbook. But I will ask you this, Matt. Your thoughts on Mike Wallace this year? If you are playing tiebreaker, I know we didn't do fantasy court tonight, but if you're playing tiebreaker between me and Bloom, which way do you lean when discussing Mike Wallace in a Todd Haley offense?
That's a good question, and I think that when you look at this, Wallace is a talent that I don't think we've seen Todd Haley really have in an offense where he's been a prominent coach, because they haven't had that type. He hasn't had that type of speed option in the past of Wallace's caliber. So if I'm looking at it from that standpoint, you could look at it one way and be pessimistic and say, well, he has to prove that he knows how to use a fast wide receiver who can stretch the field. But to me, that sounds pretty ridiculous. I mean, if you got a guy who has the rapport with Ben Roethlisberger, he can blow by anybody, and he is, and he's had the production he has. They're going to use him, and he's still going to be the primary guy in my opinion. And I look at him, I don't really like him as a top 15 talent, but that's mainly because I think that Wallace is still a little more one-dimensional than some people describe him to be. And I think that he and Deshaun Jackson are similar players in my eyes, and I actually like Deshaun Jackson more as a talent, just less as a individual when it comes to a component on a team. And I think that with this situation, Wallace is probably a guy that I would rank just outside the top 15 right now. I still think that he's going to be that top guy. But it is interesting, from Bloom's point of view, because I would think with the reports from camp that they want Ben Roethlisberger to throw from the pocket more, to be more of a timing passer, I would think, than what he's been as a guy who runs around the field, makes everybody miss, and then throws it over the heads of people. I think if he's really going to break Ben Roethlisberger of that kind of habit, that it could have more of a deleterious effect on Wallace than it would on Brown. And I could see that argument, but I'm still going to say the burden of proof is to say that Wallace will fail in this offense more than he'll succeed. So in that sense, Wallace to me is the guy that I would favor.
Yeah, and this is one that's going to be fun to watch play out, because Haley's going to get in the face of some receivers. We know that Wallace, he's not a precise route runner. He's not a guy who's mastered the route tree. And we also saw last year, and I have to keep bringing this up, second half of the year, once Brown became a starter, Brown was the man for Roethlisberger. They had mind meld. They were on the same page. Mike Wallace did very little in the second half of the year last year. I believe the numbers were about 29 for 390 and 3 touchdowns in a half of a season. That's 8 games. Now, Roethlisberger was hurt, so maybe the deep ball isn't opening up and things like that. But I think that Brown is being underestimated. Wallace is being overestimated. Oh, and there's also Emmanuel Sanders there, who's pretty good, and so is Jericho Cotchery. So this is going to be another one of those. What are we going to be watching in training camp? Oh, by the way, preseason watch list, yes. Those are coming up. Cecil and I will be going into the bunker to record those 32 very fun episodes where we talk about, what we're watching for. A lot of plate tectonics in fantasy football are going to be moving in the next month, and we're going to be covering all of it, and we're going to be telling you what's on our minds. We're going to lay it out there. We're going to be transparent for you. Also, by the way, if you're listening to this show and you don't know that the Audible, I mentioned the preseason watch lists, preview of every single team. Also, Cecil doing great work over at Riding Shotgun, which, yes, is going to be syndicated nationally on the ESPN radio. The Beat Writer Tour. There are a lot of fans of the Beat Writer Tour out there. It's happening already. Aaron Wilson, longtime beat writer for the Baltimore Ravens, also breaks national stories. Aaron Goldhammer from ESPN Cleveland. Joe Reedy from Cincinnati, one of the best characters out there among the beat writers. You got your AFC North, speaking of the Beat Writer Tour. The Audible never stops going, and this is your first year as part of the Audible crew, you'll see when we get going during August, we don't stop, and we don't stop all the way through. We don't really ever stop because we love the draft too. But we're going to be there with you all the way through. Now, Matt, we have a lot of questions from the Shark Pool, and we've certainly touched on a lot of things on people's minds. And by the way, Matt, for a week that's supposed to be a totally dead week, a boring week in the middle of a dead, boring time during the NFL calendar, it really was an action-packed week with a lot of things that you had to think about and take a stand on.
Yeah, that was for sure. I mean, it's something else that it really is, just shows that the season never ends. And you look at the whole idea of these guys falling into a hole of, some sort of criminal abyss or getting into some sort of trouble or just maturity issues, and you just hope, I'm sure that coaches hope that they could just strap a board across the hind parts of some of these players so that they wouldn't fall in that hole. But this is part of the deal. If you're a dynasty owner or a redraft, you're constantly following redrafts. A lot of people have redrafts early. And you're going to have to make stands on players like this and just decide whether or not you're going to be optimistic about it and weigh the evidence and just go with it or not. And that's what's fun about this sport, is that there are times where you just have to decide how you are going to play. Are you playing not to lose, or are you playing to win? Are you going to be conservative? Are you going to be aggressive? How do you rank players? And that's something that we can talk about all the time. I mean, one thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately is I look at rankings and what the fantasy pros and their ranking system, and I found that for the past several years, I mean, it's a fun thing to look at. I think that there's a lot of value to that for fantasy owners. You will probably never find my rankings being in the top tiers because I like to take risks. And I look at it this way, and this is something that goes along with taking a stand. When you're playing in a fantasy league, do you look at winning a championship as the goal? And if you don't hit that goal, is that failure? Certainly on some level of perspective, if I finish second or win a best record amount of money or most points, that's fun, that's great. But that's not my goal. My goal is I want to win, and I want to win big, and I want to win in some legendary way that is going to make an impact. I want to go 14-2. I want to go undefeated. I want to get the most points and all those things. To me, at this point in time, that's the fun of taking that type of risk, going all in or going home. So a lot of times my rankings reflect that high of a risk as opposed to what's the safest play. And I think that there's value to that for people to look at, and it's a different perspective than what other people may have. And that's what's fun about this time of year, because it forces you to think along those lines sometimes, maybe not in as great of a relief or contrast as I may do with rankings, but all fantasy owners are faced with those types of questions.
Yeah, and Matt, the way I like to put that is, and this is not to take anything away from the people like Bruno Boys that got number one in the Fantasy Pros rankings.
No, it's great. That's great.
It's not to lessen the accomplishment, but I will say this, and this is where stat-based approaches, I think, fall short. The goal is not to identify the 80 or 90% of cases that are going to adhere to expectations and adhere to the model. The goal is to identify the 10 or 20% that are going to be the exceptions. They're going to defy expectations. This goes into the discussion I started in the Shark Pool and something I've been bringing up on the show for a couple of weeks now. And Matt, I know you also were one of the first ones to put this germ of an idea out there. In a nutshell, Brady 6K. Brady is going to destroy records this year with the cast of characters he has, and being able to see those things. And one of the things I'll have people tell me a lot about what we do, and I'm sorry to take some time away from the Shark Pool questions. We'll try to hustle through them. But I think this is an important discussion, is the thing about each of us, me, you, Cecil, and you can add Gene in, and so many of the other football guys' staff, is you look for the stances that we're passionate about. You look for the ones that we're pounding the table, and you take those away. You take a Hillman away from Cecil. You take each of us, listen for the takes that are the strongest on. You go through the Football Guys content as a subscriber. You find this stuff, and you can take the strongest arguments from each of us, and it isn't necessarily about if you take every single ranking and every single projection and compare it to every single result, what's the average of each one. It's on the stances that were the big stances. And look, we're going to own up to our misses. Mark Ingram, why would you shy away? I mean, that's a whole other conversation. But we're going to put it out there. We're going to show our math. We're going to tell you why we think what we think. And we're about to do that. So let's jump into these questions, Matt. Lots of great questions, and one of the things great about the Shark Pool thread of questions is it just tells us what's on your mind. And if it's on your mind, then it's important to us. And some of these things are things that we haven't necessarily delved into yet. First question from Cullen Coyote. He says he's noticed in redraft leagues that there's a group of second-year receivers drafted as wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4's talent and situation to break out greatly exceed ADP. Torrey Smith, Greg Little, Titus Young, Denarius Moore, Vincent Brown, Doug Baldwin, Randall Cobb, Leonard Hankerson. He likes to target the guys with higher floors, so even if they don't hit the way that he's hoping they will, still get some flex production rather than wasting the roster spot. Question is, Matt, while all these guys showed flashes last year, are there one or two who stand out as being likely to provide that consistent, stressing consistent production as a wide receiver 3 or flex this year?
Absolutely, Bloom, and I think they're counter to the guys that I like. And, just to touch on that, when I gave my little rant here about rankings and everything, I'm not saying that my way is the best way. It's just the way that I like to do things. If you want to compete and be competitive every year and you don't want to fail big at the risk of not winning big, that's quite all right. And having rankings, looking at rankings like they do are, that some of these statistical sites look at can be quite valuable. But looking at this in this context with the wide receivers, I think Greg Little has the highest floor. I also think Doug Baldwin has a very high floor. These are two guys that I think that these teams are going to need to throw the ball a little bit, and they're going to need somebody reliable. And I think that Little's the most reliable receiver that the Browns has. And same with Baldwin. I mean, and especially with Mike Williams getting cut, now you see that Baldwin is probably going to be that guy, especially with Sidney Rice being a little bit, still dealing with injury and coming back from that. But if you're looking for highest upside, I think Titus Young and Denarius Moore by a landslide here, even though Torrey Smith has been a terrific player in his first year. I think both those guys have the opportunity to far exceed expectations. But, of course, due to the fact that Moore disappeared and Young being, having some issues off the field and maturity issues himself, that could be a little bit of a detraction there. And Cobb, to me, is just mainly situation. If he were on any other team right now, he would be clear, far and away the guy that I would choose.
Yeah, and that's why you got to watch out for him, because that situation can change very quickly. We saw Jordy Nelson last year change his situation, and it wasn't like a bunch of players had to get injured for that to happen. It was just he was producing. Aaron Rodgers found him. I would say out of this group, Greg Little is very intriguing, especially in PPR leagues. And we could go into depth on this, so I'm going to say this. Brandon Weeden, Justin Blackmon, he just threw and threw and threw. Open or not open, he just threw the ball in Blackmon's vicinity and let him do his thing. Greg Little is a very similar receiver to Justin Blackmon. I see Brandon Weeden really zeroing in on him. And a lot of people talk about, is Josh Gordon going to hurt him? Josh Gordon's going to help Little. Josh Gordon's going to clear out safeties deep. Josh Gordon's going to give defenses another player to account for that was not there before Cleveland took him. Torrey Smith, I would group in, as you were showing that group, talking about Mike Wallace, Matt. Torrey Smith fits in with Mike Wallace and Deshaun Jackson and Pierre Garçon. These boom-bust week-to-week guys, deep threats, the big play guys for their teams. If you're talking about consistent production, Greg Little really stands out on that list. Favorite fantasy team names, feel free to apologize. T4 Strains. I don't even want to touch that one with the 10-foot pole, but I'll ask all y'all out there to send in some of your favorite fantasy team names, and those that are safe, we want to truly apologize to Joe. Somewhat safe. If you've watched Arrested Development, they find ways to get around the censors. So let's find a way to get around, apologize to Joe with these. players you absolutely do not see yourself drafting for this year and why. Players will see a downswing in their production for whatever reason. This is a good one. And Matt, as we are really honing our rankings now, I know that you're probably getting to the same point I am where we've done enough mock drafts, we've meditated on these players. Obviously, training camp is going to force us to redefine some things, but the cement is starting to set. The concrete is setting, And there are players that I can see that I'm just not going to take. I'll give you one, and this isn't one of those situations where I hate him and I won't go near him because I think he's going to be an absolute bust, but I don't see Eli Manning as an elite fantasy quarterback. I don't see the New York Giants as a team that wants to throw the ball near 600 times if they can help it. Eli has some talented wide receivers. Eli will have some big games for sure. He also had a decent amount of duds last year for a player that finished with almost 5,000 passing yards. I want a quarterback, fantasy quarterback, with the offense unquestionably running through him. I just don't see Eli as that guy. So I may talk myself into taking Brady in the second round. I may talk myself into taking Vic in the fourth or fifth. I may just wait and take Matt Ryan and Robert Griffin III or some other variation of a committee. I just don't see myself taking Eli Manning in the fifth, sixth round range where I see him going. So that's one guy who's not going to be on any of my teams, not going to be drafted on any of my teams this year. Who's a player comes to mind when you think about that, Matt?
I can think of a whole bunch of players, actually, which is sad to say. We'll lead off with the two that we already talked about, Kenny Britt and Des White, or Des Bryant, who is about to go the way of Des White if he continues to act this way, and he won't be in the league. But I think that, there's just too many question marks with their talent, and they're going to go too high for my taste. Sean Green would be another perennial candidate there, mainly because I just don't believe in his talent. I don't believe that he runs with the urgency that he needs to. I don't think that he understands really how to run inside as well as he once displayed at Iowa, but it just hasn't shown up on a consistent basis. And I think that this team is the Jets are desperate this year, or they're going to be desperate if they don't get off to a good start, and he could get a quick hook, even though there's so much confidence in him. And then I'd say quarterback, I don't care how late he goes, I'm just not big on Ryan Fitzpatrick. I know that he starts off great, but then he fades into oblivion after that, and it's just one of those, or as Mike Tyson would say, he'd fade into Bolivian. And I think that that's really one of those things that we look at here and realize that I just don't believe that in this offense right now, looking at the receivers, that they've improved it enough for Fitzpatrick not to have another second half swoon. And I don't want to get excited about what he does early on and then have to hope that I can trade for him, especially 2 years after all our fantasy owners have gotten the memo that he fades in the second half.
Yeah, he had that rib injury last year, which may or may not be a complete explanation. You like the Chan-Gailey offense being opened up, and he's got some talented guys. I'll say this, Fitzpatrick is one of the fantasy backup quarterbacks I would draft. So that's a high compliment where I'm coming from, honestly, because there's a short list of quarterbacks I draft this year, probably 20, 22 at the most, unless you're talking about a two-quarterback or a super flex league. And J.B. Wood, and it's awesome to have J.B. Wood in the house, in the chat says he expects to see Vince Young start this year, which is interesting, simply because Chan-Gailey is one of those offensive minds who will put something together strictly to the strengths of that quarterback. He made Tyler Thigpen a fantasy viable quarterback back in Kansas City. And also, I got to bring up Lee Dog Law had a good fantasy team name. I got to bring it up because it's relevant. It would have been his 75th birthday yesterday, I think. Kendall Hunter S. Thompson. So too weird to live, too rare to die, and it would have been 75. And I got to bring up something else really quick because, and by the way, I get a couple of notes from people, I shouldn't do this. This is probably going to backfire. Approval is cool, and I like hosting. So whenever I get some nice notes, and you guys send really nice notes, it makes me feel good. So because I'm hosting, I get to control this. And Matt, this is someone that you actually sent over to me, and I want to just call it this idea to see, first of all, we have the best listeners and people that are passionate, not just about fantasy football, but about the thinking, the strategy, and everything that goes into it. And I just want to bring this up as an example really quick of the kind of thing you can do if you're getting bogged down, or just inspire you to think the way that one of our listeners, Zach Thompson, has brought up. I think he called it undrafting. I think this is really cool. And basically, the idea is that before the real draft, the real auction, the way that keepers are determined are there'll be a protection round where you get to protect a certain number of your players, and then a selection round. And guess what you get to do in the selection round? You get to tag players that force the other teams to lose them, and they go into the free agent pool. So you're drafting the players that the other teams can't keep. I think this is awesome. The idea of looking through everyone else's roster after they protect players and saying, who do I most want them to not have? And everybody getting a chance. And everybody's team. So, you can imagine it, right, Matt, where everyone gangs up on one team. You're like the champion last year. Well, fine, you protected your 3 players. Now we're just going to decimate your roster. So this is fun. This is fun, and I think that, honestly, there's almost an infinite amount of combinations and rules and formats that you can come up with fantasy football, and I love it. And Zach is not the first person to send us some really inventive, interesting things going on with people in their leagues and what they're trying to do, and it's great. I just sometimes I'm in awe, honestly, that we can serve y'all because you give us so much, and that's a very cool thing. Okay, so we've got more questions. Snellman wants to know, since a lot of talk about running back lack, scarcity, also a lot of talk about Gronkowski and Graham. He wants to know about taking running backs early and waiting on tight end. He's seeing Gonzalez, Miller, Rudolph fall very long way. While they won't put up Graham numbers, they could end up in the top 10. Any other tight ends you like in the late rounds? And Matt, I'll let you answer this first because I don't want to steal any thunder. But I will say, doing the numerous mocks, we've been doing at least once a week since May, it does become clear that, you can wait until the 6th round. You get pretty much like what you see there at tight end. 8th round, yeah, it's not as good as quarterback, but it's good. 10th round, yeah, I can still get by. Even in the 12th round, occasionally you'll see some tight ends fall. If I had to rely on, say, Brent Selleck as my starter going into the year, I'm not going to be absolutely despondent. So what do you think about later round tight ends?
I love the idea, and I just actually finished a Strange Sanctuary piece on a tight end who I'll talk about in a moment here. But let me lay out a little bit of some of this stuff, because you mentioned Selleck's a good pick. Certainly, you look after round 6 and you can see guys like Fred Davis, Jacob Tamme, Brandon Pettigrew, all being guys that have the potential for 70, 80 receptions and earning enough touchdowns to be top 10, maybe even, crack the top 5 if all goes, swimmingly well here. But the thing that's interesting about this whole Graham thing is you look at that, and most fantasy owners, I think, expect that there would be some sort of inflation with the number of tight ends who are going to be picked in the early rounds. But when I looked from 2007 to 2012, you only saw, there's a steady rise that there were maybe since round 5 you would see, tight ends picked before round 6, actually. You would see that, there were 5 in 2007, 6 in 2008, 5 in 2009. And then for the past 3 years, there have been 7 tight ends picked within the first 6 rounds. But then when you look at the highest rounds that they were picked, that's when you start to see the difference, that you'd see, the 3rd and 4th round being the highest rounds that these guys would go off the board. It was usually anywhere between 1 to 3 players, and we knew who those guys were, mainly Gates Gonzalez and then either Witten or Jermichael Finley later on. But then this year, you're starting to see that you've got Gronkowski and Graham going in the first 2 rounds by ADP, if you're looking at something like Fantasy Calculator as an ADP source. And that then you have, after that, though, you still have 7 going by round 6, and most of these picks are going, after round 4. Gates is going in round 4. Davis is going in round 4 or round 5, and then Finley, and it's kind of in that range where you usually see them. So that they're not going any higher than you would have thought because these 2 top tight end prospects are going off earlier. It's not raising the whole game here. So you're certainly going to get an opportunity for value. And those guys that I mentioned are certainly on that list, and the guys you mentioned there. You can also look at Greg Olson as possibly on that list, Tony Gonzalez in the 10th round, if he continues to defy age and, show Skip Bayless that being a vegan isn't harmful to being an athlete. That type of thing. But if we're going to look at some guys that you're really going to swing for the fences on here, and you're going to go high risk, because I like to do that, and I've been doing this in a lot of mock drafts, is waiting, because I'm going to be able to get more guys at running back, wide receiver, maybe at quarterback, and wait on my first tight end. And if you're going to go that high risk, there's 2 guys I would mention. And the first one is James Casey. If he fits as a tight end in your league and not as a fullback, if they technically allow him to be an H-back, then go for him there, because you look at what he was able to do last year in limited time, and we've talked about him a lot in this show, just his downfield speed, his ability to play multiple positions, and the way that they can use him as a movable chess piece in that Houston offense. And they need somebody like that. Certainly Lestar Jean has his backers, and I think that there's a lot of potential there for him as a wide receiver. But the fact that they can use Casey to draw a lot of mismatches could be quite a valuable fantasy boon for people, and he flashed that with against New Orleans last year. And then the other guy that I like, and I got to credit Joe Bryant for also talking about him and saying I think people are missing the boat on him, is tight end Kellen Davis with the Bears. You look at the fact that he really hasn't proven anything for anybody other than he's had a really great touchdown to target ratio in 2009 and last year, having 5 touchdowns to 34 targets last year. But when he was my number 2 tight end, just behind Fred Davis in the 2008 RSP, and I thought he had Pro Bowl potential because he had good acceleration, very strong, tall, good hands, adjusts well to the football. He was just kind of a knucklehead at Michigan State in terms of maturity, but he's proven to be a good citizen with the Bears. He's shown that he's a good blocker, and even under what I call the Mike Martz Eastern Bloc perspective of, tight end play in offenses, he still was somebody that Jay Cutler liked to target in the red zone. And I think that with Mike Tice, you look at his offenses with the Vikings, and they were very productive with tight ends. Even with Chris Carter, Randy Moss, they still had tight ends who were top 10 caliber tight ends in Byron Chamberlain, Jermaine Wiggins, Jim Kleinsasser, guys that you wouldn't expect to be top 10 fantasy tight ends. So when you look at this situation that they're going to use a tight end more because this is his style of offense, the track record suggests that Kellen Davis could be a top 10 tight end, even if he just keeps maybe he just raises his touchdowns to 8 instead of 5, and he gets that 40 to 60 catches. Let's split the difference at 50 and averages 10 yards a catch, which is lower than what he did last year. You're looking at 50 catches, 500 yards, and 8 touchdowns. Based on the past 5 years of tight end play, that would put him in the top 12 fantasy-wise. So I think it's within the realm of possibility, and if you take him, either of these guys at the end of your draft, you could end up with a huge bargain. And if you miss on them, that's okay, because tight end is usually the one position where you, after defense and kicker, that you can play the waiver wire game and get starting quality production out of a player week to week.
Love James Casey. I can't believe there are some dynasty leagues I'm in that I let him hang out on the waiver wire for too long and missed him. But we're big fans of Thor here, and I agree with you, Matt. It's just a question of them using him. It's not a question of talent. And there's an opening for him to get used. Kellen Davis, I just don't, not a fluid athlete, doesn't have the natural ball skills that I like. Certainly the physical talent is fantastic. I mean, the physical talent is awesome with a guy like Kellen Davis, and they will use him. We'll see about your man Evan Rodriguez there, and Mike Tice loves the tight end, so this is going to be some good stuff. Real quick, got to mention and we're getting to that time of year. The draft slots are coming, Paul Revere style. Draft slots are coming, and if you sign up for the FFPC main event by this coming Monday, you will get your team's draft slot with over a month before the start of the season. Why is that important? Because you can start projecting any number of scenarios, and like we talked about, planning, taking a stand on these things, knowing what you're going to do before these things happen instead of panicking on the clock. Important. FFPC main event is once again the premier contest in high-stakes fantasy football. Over 700 teams registered already. $200,000 grand prize, $10,000, 500 individual league prizes are the largest in the industry. Experience a live Las Vegas draft party, special events at the Rio Hotel Casino. You can draft online, comfort your own home with no additional fees. The FFPC league format and rules are identical to its popular sister contest, the Football Guys Player Championship, and for the 5th consecutive year, the FFPC is the only high-stakes contest to place the entire prize pool in attorney escrow for the duration of the season. If you've been playing high-stakes fantasy football for a while, I don't have to tell you how important that is. The FFPC continues to set the standard. In lightning-fast payouts, you'll have your prize award within days of winning it. Go to the FFPC message boards, see the anticipation growing daily for the 2012 FFPC main event, and register today to get your draft slot. I mean, I don't know about you, but if I can get in before the 23rd, probably like first thing when I wake up, last thing before I fall asleep, when I'm in the shower, when I'm on the pot, I'm just, your wheels are always turning, just like the wheels are always turning the minds of this show. Now I'm going to pick and choose some questions here. I apologize for those that I might skip over, but we were just talking about this guy in the chat room. I think that it was JB Wood that brought him up, Matt. Eagles wants to know about Jared Cook. We were talking about tight ends late. This Britt Iffy, we've talked about that. Everyone's bumping up Nate Washington. But what about Cook? Is he on the verge of a breakout season? Talent is tantalizing. Production has not been there. Is this the year?
Let's look at this from two sides here. The side that I would say to be optimistic about him is the fact that Chris Palmer didn't get the chance to install his full offense, and because of that, it was still kind of a new system for them. And Cook was probably adjusting along with the other guys. So maybe he flashed some things here and there, especially with Matt Hasselbeck under the helm. But at the same time, this year having a full off season to absorb the offense, maybe this is something that will be work in his favor. Certainly the talent's there physically. But I also think that Cook has seemed a little bit lost in terms of being a tight end in what the Titans used to do, which was, you look at Craig Stevens, who, Ben Muth, the Football Outsiders, former offensive lineman with Stanford and with the San Diego Chargers for a minute or two. He does a great job analyzing offensive linemen and just the run game in general and blocking. And in the RSP project that I have out that his team, he talked about Craig Stevens being the best blocking tight end in the league. If they're going to, even though they're talking about employing a lot of run and shoot concepts, it doesn't mean they're spreading the field all the time with 4 wide receivers. And they are, I would think that they're still going to use a lot of 3 receiver sets. That's something that the Giants still do, and they use a lot of run and shoot concepts. And they run a lot of 11 personnel with 1 tight end there. And if that's the case, it doesn't necessarily mean Cook is going to be the main man on the field there. And you have to account for your guy, Taylor Thompson, who I agree with you. I mean, he looks fantastic. And if there's a guy that, that played defensive end that could have that Gronkowski upside, I would probably put Thompson over Kellen Davis in that realm, and I think that he's someone that you really need to watch for, because when somebody like Chris Palmer says he's a natural pass catcher, and when he got that kind of attention and that he has that kind of speed and size, it looks to me that he would be more the heir apparent in that passing game than even possibly Cook, who was more of a glorified, slow, tall, wide receiver at South Carolina in a Spurrier-friendly offense than an NFL tight end candidate.
Yeah, and I think that the thing about Taylor Thompson, real quick, to touch on this, okay, is Taylor Thompson going to be the next Rob Gronkowski or the next big thing? Maybe so, maybe not. However, the beginning of his story is how we have found the great tight ends in the past. These guys, Jimmy Graham, Antonio Gates, where they show the raw skills, even though they have not been making that position their home, or in the case of Graham and Gates, even the football field their home. But somebody sees it, and again, people are effusive about it. When they see it, they say, "This guy's really got it." Tennessee's going to spend a fifth-round pick on Taylor Thompson as a tight end when he did not play tight end in college. He was a defensive end. And then they're cutting Daniel Graham, a good all-around tight end, because of what they're seeing from him in his first 2 months with the team, without pads on. This is how these great stories start. If Taylor Thompson ends up being a perennial 990, 1,100, 10 touchdown guy, you can look back at it and say, like, we had clues. The clues are there. On Cook really fast, not a good blocker at all. Doesn't seem like he's a heady player. Doesn't seem like he's a smart player. Again, going back to this Chris Palmer offense being installed, there's going to be some run and shoot, Kevin Gilbride kind of stuff there, option routes. Just does not feel like it's going to be something that Jared Cook flourishes in. Sorry, Jared Cook, I think Mike Clay from PFF and Roto World said 22% of the snaps he was on the field for last year. I mean, what's going to change between last year and this year to make him that much bigger a part of this offense? Yes, the talent's there. The talent's been there all along. We'll see. I love Jared Cook's natural talent as a pass catcher. The other things that will keep him on the field and get him consistent targets just haven't been there. So there's a lot of tight ends that you would want to look at that time in your draft. I don't know that Cook would be at the top of that list. Matt, let's just touch this one really quick just so people know and they're clear on this. Buffalo backfield, and I'm not FEC trumpet. I'm not saying you shouldn't ask this question because this is a good one to bring up. This is probably at least in the top 20 or 30 things when you're saying, what are the important things for me to think about going in a draft? Buffalo backfield, it's not going to change that much. Fred Jackson's still the man. Matt, agree?
Oh, absolutely agree. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. And, oh, wow. We got another question, and I'm going to bring up this question because it has a David Foster Wallace reference. Big David Foster Wallace, and it is from a David Foster Wallace book, Lavach Beadsman. And we've talked a lot about Demaryius Thomas, but we can put a real fine point on it because he wants to know ceiling, floor, medium. He took him at the end of the third in a non-PPR wide receiver one. Feels very confident. Physical abilities better than Harrison or Wayne or anybody Peyton's had, but he's a risk. If he doesn't learn the route tree and the audibles, he'll be forgotten. What's the most likely outcome? And then we were just talking about Fred Davis in the chat. So Demaryius Thomas, we've talked about Dez. I'll put it this way to you, Matt. Where do you put your money on the table for Demaryius Thomas, or have you even in any of the drafts you've done so far? Where's the break point for you?
Thomas, I think for Thomas, when I look at him, he's in my top 20, and that to me is that if I can get him somewhere between, say, the 17th to 20th receiver overall, which is probably on the low end for most people, that's where I would want to get him. I'm looking for him to still be more of a value, but I think that if I look at him, say, somewhere between the fourth and fifth round, if he's still there, and I've taken a couple of receivers, and I'm going in more of an upside down drafting style. I like him more as a wide receiver 3 with wide receiver 1 upside, and I think the reason is that as great as he looks in practice, as great as Cecil's reported a lot of wonderful things about what Thomas is starting to do, it still comes down to quick recognition, under fire, in tight coverage, tight window throws, being able to make reads on the fly with defenses that you're not always practicing for, or not expecting at the times that you would think. And to me, Demaryius Thomas isn't as heady of a player as Eric Decker is, and I think that it's going to show. I'm still standing by my thought that Eric Decker edges Demaryius Thomas in terms of production because of the fact that Peyton Manning is the quarterback, and Manning is going to rely on somebody when it comes to great timing and someone who that they know is going to be where they need to be,
right,
based on what the defense is dictating. And to me, it's just the slimmest of margins.
Yeah, and real quick on Fred Davis, just another one of those guys that you can look at. And Fivish did the numbers, or recalled that he was on pace. Remember that 4-game suspension last year? On pace to be the number 4 tight end last year. That was with Sexy Rexy. Now he's got Robert Griffin III. Now, they were happy to franchise him for the pretty cheap price. I forget what the tight end franchise tag number was, like $5.4 million or something, and not sign him to a long-term deal. And, if you didn't catch, again, the Fred Davis attorney at law stuff from this summer, just classic. I will not even try to capture it, but just classic stuff. Classic stuff. I'm going to jump ahead to Socrates here, Matt, and bring up, we're going to talk a couple of names here, oft-injured players, and, whether these guys who might be able to help you this year. What about Sidney Rice? Man, love the talent. There was an E factor to Sidney Rice's game, and we've seen it in the past. But 2 shoulders that have been scoped out now, concussions actually what ended his season last year. There's the hip thing. Sidney Rice is still there in 9th, 10th round in drafts. Are you thinking that's a good proposition?
This is a great question, because if there were 2 players that embody, when it comes to prospects, that embody Bloom and embody me, it's Sidney Rice and Steve Smith of the St. Louis Rams. Because Bloom, he loves the E factor, and to me, it's like I get too hung up on technique sometimes, and these guys embody both of those opposite poles. For me, I'm predictably going to say I just don't trust Sidney Rice unless he's got a guy like Brett Favre throwing to him, and I just don't trust him to stay healthy. And unless Russell Wilson just looks unbelievable in camp and takes the league by storm, which I don't expect happening this year, I don't see Rice being a great value. I think that he can play to where he's being picked, especially with Matt Flynn, if Matt Flynn is going to throw him the football. But because of the unsettled quarterback situation, I'm a little iffier on him. But I would like to say that Steve Smith, Jeff Fisher may be blowing a little bit too much sunshine towards the media but he did say that the reason they signed him is that he had an extraordinary workout in April. And also the Rams beat writers have said in June, that Steve Smith really started to come on in OTAs late, and that in the final 2 weeks he looked good and should be climbing the depth chart. And to me, if Steve Smith is healthy, there's no question that he is the best receiver on that team. And Sam Bradford is a guy that likes to throw the ball in the way that you need a receiver who's going to be where you need him to be, and who runs terrific routes and makes tough plays in traffic. And there isn't another receiver on par with Steve Smith on that team other than Greg Salas, who has also been making a little bit of noise there. And Greg Salas is someone that these are 2 guys that could be lessons that you don't want to write them off too quickly. The thing with Smith is the dreaded microfracture surgery, and is he ever going to be able to come back and return to what he was? But if the whispers are true and this continues to happen, I have no doubt that he could be the steal of the draft for wide receivers. If you're hearing in camp that he looks like the guy of old, and suddenly beat writers are all over him, and you hear, yes, he is now number 3 or number 2 on the depth chart, as opposed to maybe he'll make the number 4. And if that happens, you need to be all over this guy.
Yeah, and that, I would agree with that. And I have a few. I took him 18, 19 round in a few of the mocks I've done early. I'm thinking about doing a series in August called Cloudy Crystal Ball. And what it is are situations that are really, really hard to determine right now, and how you handle that in your draft. Do you just square it off completely? Do you go, Detroit running back is a good example of this. Do you swear it off completely? Do you take one of the guys that's going the earliest and take the biggest boom bust pick? Do you just wait for the last one and take the upside but not have to pay as much? And the St. Louis Rams wide receiver situation is just tailor-made for this kind of situation. You have Danny Amendola and you have Steve Smith competing in the slot. You have Brian Quick and Chris Gibbons, the rookies, that they're going to push in there. You have Denario Alexander. Hello, anyone. And I think it was you, Matt, that compared Josh Gordon to Denario Alexander. I think that's an excellent comparison. And that's not putting down Gordon at all, because if you've seen Denario Alexander while healthy, guy can play. I mean, he actually is extremely athletic for a big receiver, has good ball skills, has good aggression on the field. So it's really wide open there. And somebody has got to catch the ball. Lance Kendricks is going to get another shot there, too. So good stuff. Good questions. And I just love having a chance to bring these things up. Lowman, too, has a question, Matt. And we hear about drafts. We get questions from people that they have leagues where they get to pick their draft slot. And he wants to know best and worst draft slot in a 12-team league. And, this is one where I think that, again, the theme we've been hitting for the entire offseason so far seems to point in one direction. But, Matt, you often surprise me with your answers. So what is the answer?
Man, I don't have a good answer. It's subjective to me. I mean, I look at this, and with the mock drafts I've had, I still like picking at the top, basically because you're getting these top-tier running backs. And I think that then, you're able to take value after that and kind of help dictate how runs can occur and just get a better overall view of the landscape. But I wouldn't argue with going, also looking at the tail end of a draft and, either end of the bookend, I guess you would say, because of that very factor. And you can look at the fact that you could start a trend-wide take and, kind of going the opposite route with tight end, maybe earlier than people would expect, and then building on, strengths at where, people are, zigging one direction and you zag the opposite. And I do just have to say this, Bloom, that I know this is a bit of a tangent, but I just had a weird moment here in my house, like about 10 minutes ago while we were sitting here, because I have this, porch light that goes on automatically. And apparently my wife has used these fluorescent, these long-lasting light bulbs to try and, for us to save energy with it. But it seems to flicker on and off. And for some reason, it looked like it was flickering red on and off through the shade in my window. And I thought that a cop car had pulled up to my house. I'm thinking, guys, you know what? I might be into the off-season things going on here. And I'm thinking, what did I do?
Yeah, right. It's like I think it was KRS One who said, "When I see the red and blue, my blood run cold." Yeah. Good. All kinds of strange things happen. Strange things in the air when we're doing the Audible.
Season needs to start.
Right, or at least training camp. In the worst draft position we're talking about on the chat right now, and Jay Hart said 7 to 9. He hasn't done well, and I agree. 7 to 9 can be tough, and where it's really tough is if you see MJD and Chris Johnson go in front of you, then you have to be the one to break the seal on the quarterbacks and give up taking quarterback value later, or you break the seal on tight ends and you give up taking tight end value later. Maybe you take Calvin Johnson, but the reality is there's going to be great wide receivers well into the 6, 7, 8 rounds. You want to get a running back in the first round. Are you going to reach for Darren McFadden at that point? I mean, it's hard to feel good about making McFadden your first round pick. Your second round pick, sure. First round pick, so it's tougher. And if you get 10, 11, 12, you're going to probably get McFadden to be your number one running back with that stud quarterback or tight end. It's tough. So 7 to 9, I think, are the ones you want to avoid right now. And Electric Ellis wants to know what you did and hope you hit it well. And, of course, if Matt hit it well, he's not going to say what he did. So that's for another podcast. But anyway, so going through some questions here. Want to know, Mark Weimer great staffer at Football Guys, wants to know, if you own Lynch in Dynasty Keeper League, who do you target in free agent auctions? And I know that Cease did not have the kinds of things to say about Robert Turbin. I was not a big Robert Turbin fan, but Matt, maybe you can make people more optimistic about Turbin. And yeah, I brought up Leon Washington, Craig Lumpkin, Terrell Sutton. You can touch on, if you want, whether any of them would be worth a pickup, or is the clear answer to this one, Turbin?
I don't think the clear answer is Turbin, and as I alluded to before Cecil went on, was that I think he's a 2-down back at best this year. But in dynasty leagues, he probably does have the most upside to hope for. I just wouldn't spend a lot of money on him, because if he doesn't show the maturity that I haven't seen as a runner, then you're looking at guys like Washington, who, I think people were kind of left scratching their head that he wasn't more of an impact player over the past couple of years with that team, because he has that nice burst. He certainly can be versatile, but he's still more of a change of pace player, at least at this stage. That's all he's really proven. Terrell Sutton, to me, is intriguing. I mean, if he's in shape, quite versatile. I know Jeff Hazley is someone that really has always liked him. Bloom, you've always been a fan of him, so have I. Versatile player out of Northwestern, can catch the ball, great balance, tougher runner than you'd expect when you first looked at a guy coming out of that spread system at Northwestern, but he's proven, along with many other spread backs, that they can get it done between the tackles. And then after that, you look at Craig Lumpkin, and to me, Craig Lumpkin is nothing more than a 3rd-down change of pace guy at this stage. Though if somehow he finds some sort of fountain of youth with his knees and some of the injuries that he had, and surprises people with his burst, he had as much talent as any back in college football early on in his career, but I just don't think that you're going to look at him that way. So to me, the order is probably an order of optimism, drafting late and not expecting much other than a lottery pick. You go Turbin, Sutton, and then Washington, actually, and to me, just because I think Washington is still being pegged as a change of pace guy.
Yeah, and real quick, I want to interject because my mind is jumping around here. It's some question I got last night that I had an answer to that confused people, and then I clarified it. And some of this is touches on just about every question we have, really. But someone was asking about draft strategy. Do you go BPA? Do you go tier-based drafting? Do you go with VBD? And I said, well, really, you have to have a tier-based drafting approach with of emphasis on best player available and a nice element of gut feeling, basically. A VBD, and VBD is tough because you don't know what kind of VBD is going to be there the next round of position. That's where tiers come in. So tier-based drafting kind of incorporates VBD. So really, what does it mean to say it's all those things? Well, you want to take the best player at the position that will have the biggest drop-off before the next time you pick. And how do you determine that? Well, it's just based on gut feeling of what your league mates are going to do. So, again, what's the bottom line of this? There's no simple answers. Here's a quick and easy system, here's a set of numbers, here's a list of players, and here are some hard and fast rules. If someone's giving you hard and fast rules, then that's just not accurate. That's not how it really goes down. Now, what we can give you is thinking these things through so that when you are on the clock or when you see 2 or 3 players coming up, to you, one name has that shine about it, and the other ones don't, and then hopefully they don't get sniped right in front of you. Got to go back real quick and mention that we're getting there, and if you're listening to the show, you're ready to step up to the big leagues, you're ready to step up to the high stakes leagues, and that means the Fantasy Football Players Championship, the FFPC, the 2012 main event. If you sign up by this coming Monday, you will get your draft slot over a month before the event. $200,000 grand prize, $10,500 individual league prizes. You can go to Vegas, high roller at the Rio. You can stay at home, draft with, and Matt, I'm saying, like, I want to be in my own habitat when I'm drafting. Vegas certainly not my habitat. Some of you out there, maybe Vegas is your habitat. Either way, no additional fees. The format is the same as the Football Guys Player Championship. So important that the entire prize pool will be in escrow for the duration of the season, so you will get your prize within days of winning it. So, the Fantasy Football Players Championship. All right, you're looking for a high-stake league. If you're listening to this show and you're ramping up your preparation this early, you can hang in these contests. Maybe you're the one that me talking about lifting up the $200,000 grand prize, and I certainly would love to hear about that from one of our listeners. But really, if you're going to get into a high-stakes league, you can get into this one before Monday, get your draft slot so that you are going to do what I was just talking about. When your pick's coming up, you're not going to fret. There's no hand-wringing. You're going to know what's going on because you had your draft slot for over a month. Now we've got about 5 minutes left here to talk some questions. Love this question from El Guapo, number 7, who will be listening to this Friday morning. And we love you out there. And we totally understand if you can't make it into the chat room and listen to us live on Thursday nights. And we're just glad this can provide stuff for people all weekend. And Darren Sproles, lots of Darren Sproles talk on this show for years. Darren Sproles is one of the breakout players of the year, talking about, hey, passing league, perfect example of a player utilized to the best of his ability as a receiver out of the backfield. Thoughts on any of the following young backs, also anyone you might have missed, having a Darren Sproles-type role and a Darren Sproles-type season? He lists off Shane Vereen, Jaquiz Rogers, and if you listen to the show, you already know that would be my answer to this question. LaMichael James, Ronnie Hillman, Cease has trumpeted his love for him. Jahvid Best, who's basically already done it. It's just a question of injury. C.J. Spiller. Ryan Williams, who might be the one of these things are not like the others. And Dexter McCluster. And, Matt, I know that you and I are going to be like the guys on the island still fighting World War II when it's over 40 years later with Dexter McCluster. He's a I wish I knew how to quit you guy. And it may take until a second team, but I'm glad that El Guapo put him on the list. So, great question. This is exactly the way you should be thinking about fantasy football. Who's this year's Darren Sproles?
I have to say I'm in agreement with Cecil that Ronnie Hillman is the guy that I'm most anticipating to be that guy, mainly because of his explosiveness and in this offense. I think that it's going to become very apparent quickly that teams are going to have to stop Peyton Manning, and whoever's running the ball is really going to have some great opportunities there. I would probably also add that I like Shane Vereen a lot. I like his receiving skills. I think that he's someone that is going to get a chance to replace the Danny Woodhead role, but also combine it a little bit more with that that Kevin Faulk, maybe that Stevan Ridley role, and take a little bit of his opportunities and be a bigger cog in this offense than what people may anticipate. I know that someone like David Levin might David Yutkin might disagree with me there, since he's the Patriots wonk on our board who does a great job of being able to keep up with stuff there. But I do like his ability. After that, you got to look at Jahvid Best and just say as long as he's healthy, but he's just the biggest wild card because of his health issues there. But I mean, a lot of guys that you mentioned, certainly worthwhile to target here, but you just have to remember what kind of offense it is, and are they really going to be splitting time with these other backs, or are they going to be a primary option? And I think that the guys I just mentioned, Hillman, Vereen, Best, probably have the best option of being that 1A back or lead back in a pass-oriented offense. Jaquiz Rogers, I love his talent. I just, again, it's just a matter of whether you believe that this team is going to go all in its passing attack, or it's just going to be a little bit more limited, and the only way he explodes is if Michael Turner gets hurt or gets really run down to the point that they have to go in an opposite direction.
Well, with Quiz, real quick to defend him or to say why. Dirk Cutter, new offensive coordinator, tons of signs that they are indeed going to go more pass-heavy, and that's why another question was asking about quarterback-by-committee quarterbacks, and Matt Ryan certainly falls into that group. And Dirk Cutter loves the screen pass, and also Mike Smith was gushing about Jaquiz Rogers and talking about how much more than what they expect him to be he is. So, great question, though, but Matt, just to make it clear, right, if Dexter McCluster gets released or just as a free agent and gets a meh contract, if you and I are in the same dynasty league, I mean, we're going to be fighting each other for him on waivers, right? I mean, we're going to – you're not –
I'm not telling you that. No.
Well, wait.
Yeah, we would be. We would be.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
We're not giving up on Dexter McCluster. That's the main thing I want people to know about. Maybe I'm not saying to draft Dexter McCluster this year. I'm saying do not give up on Dexter McCluster for the long haul. He's going to be one of those players. We got 60 seconds left, so I'm not going to jump into any more of these questions. But Matt, in the terms of the roller coaster, we're at that click, click, click part. And I suppose that the click, click, click isn't the first big hill of roller coaster. That's week one. This is the part where we get a little like, woo, ah, a little zigzag back and forth with training camp. So just real quick, how much do you find yourself changing your rankings during training camp in the preseason?
I actually find myself changing it a fair bit, and it's not just due to injury, but also just praise about players that maybe I have ranked a little bit conservative in terms of lower than what I really feel about them until I see some sort of confirmation. So I would say it's not that 80% of my rankings change, but I would say a good 40% of them could be the high point that end up changing outside of injury.
Yeah, in other words, be paying attention. We're going to be paying attention. We're going to be talking about everything that we're seeing. We're going to be here for you. We love it. We're so happy to be bringing this show to you all the time. So as everyone out there, as always, stay classy.
Blog Talk Radio, where millions of hosts and listeners gather.